Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carruth Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2003 epic war drama titled Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World. Now this movie runs for 2 hours and 18 minutes long. It is directed by Peter Weir. It is produced by Samuel Goldwyn Jr., Duncan Henderson, and Peter Weir. The script was written by Peter Weir and John Cawley. It is based off of the novels, both Master and Commander and The Far Side of the World. It was part of the whole Aubrey-Maturin series of novels written by Patrick O'Brian. There's actually a total of 20 of them, which of course centers around the Napoleonic Wars. Well, actually, it was more or less based off of the War of 1812, but they decided to sort of switch gears a bit and make it into the Napoleonic Wars between England and France. Anyhow, these series of novels were written by Patrick O'Brian. The score was composed by Iva Davis, Christopher Gordon, and Richard Tugnetti. The cinematography was by Russell Boyd, and it was edited by Lee Smith. And the stars of the movie are Russell Crowe, Paul Bettany, James D'Arcy, Edward Woodall, Chris Larkin, Robert Pugh, Max Benitz, Max Perkis, Lee Ingleby, Richard McCabe, Ian Mercer, Tony Dolan, rounding out the cast, David Threlfell. There's some strange reason I have to pronounce his name like this, but it just gives me that kind of urge to do it, though I'm not making fun of his name, but it just makes me want to just say it this way. Billy Boyd! There you go, I got that out of my system. Billy Boyd is his name. Billy Boyd. Alright. Rounding out the cast, we have Bryan Dick, Joseph Morgan, George Innes, Patrick Gallagher, John DeSantis, and Mark Lewis Jones. So set during the Napoleonic Wars in 1805, Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World is a on-the-sea story about a British ship called the HMS Surprise, led by lucky Captain Jack Aubrey, played by Russell Crowe, as they are assigned to take down the French ship Acheron that is causing problems across the coasts of Brazil. So under the direction of Peter Weir, based loosely on the Aubrey-Maturin novels by author Patrick O'Brian, we are offered a visual masterpiece with an atmosphere that's truly second to none. Yes, this is a really, really brilliantly constructed film, and I really, truly enjoy these kind of movies. If you're into like these kind of war epic movies, I'm not sure if it's actually based on a true story, but it could be inspired by actual events, and the characters depicted in this movie are pretty much loosely based off of real characters. I think Jack Aubrey was supposed to be inspired by the character of Captain Thomas Cochrane, and I believe his second in command and his trustworthy ally, Dr. Stephen Maturin, played by Paul Bettany, is perhaps somewhat loosely based off of naturalist Charles Darwin. For some strange reason, I see a bit of Charles Darwin in the character of Dr. Maturin. but he could also be based off of other characters similar to the likings of Stephen Maturin. The shots are truly a first-class A-level thing of beauty. Yes, everything that you would expect to see on a warship comes across as authentic and also seems to be very well researched. The costumes, the props. There might be a few occasional anachronisms here and there, but it doesn't really hinder too much. Sadly, however, there are many scenes that are mundane, in spite of the fact that they are in the middle of a serious battle, making everything about it way too light in its premise. That's where some of the big weaknesses is that a lot of this movie was about basically the crew just going through all the procedures of operating the ship, whether it be rebuilding, reshaping, remodeling. And many people who are like war enthusiasts, well, I hate to break it to you, but there are few and far between wars. Sure, they are very climactic and very exciting to watch, but there's a lot more dialogue in this movie and a lot more character-driven. And if you're a war enthusiast who love to see movies about people getting blown up, ships and weaponries being destroyed, and people losing their lives, and a massive blood count, well, you're all just a bunch of fucking sadists. No, I'm just kidding. You just won't find too many of that here. I'm sorry to say. I mean, to tell you the truth, the execution is good, however, its concept is highly questionable. The movie is actually quite difficult to critique, being that the positive things are way out in the open to fully appreciate, and that the good does outweigh the bad. The failings in this movie are ubiquitous but subtle. So to put it mildly though, the movie is a work of fiction. The settings, the props, the costumes, they all seem to have the makings of a film based on real events and may have been inspired by real events. This movie is very high in its authenticity. And though there were battle scenes that were brutal and bloody, like I said before, they are few but far between. But what's problematic about Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, is that at times the direction where the movie is heading feels more like this movie seems rather for kids than for adults. I mean, it's almost like as though as if the movie could be almost like kids playing with their little model ships, and, you know, they have their guns and their cannons, and, you know, they're just playing around. And this movie seems to tend to actually gear towards kids than adults. I know most of the ship's crew were predominantly small children, orphans, who did not have any family or did not have a home, so they eventually were taken by this ship and this crew and were made to become more adult than what their intentions are. They had to grow up a lot more faster than us normal human beings. Not to say these kids were abnormal, but they had to evolve at a much faster rate than the average human being. We take a long time to evolve. We take a long time to mature and become adults. Maybe it's because we have a little more longer time on this earth than a lot of people, than a lot of other creatures on this earth, but we grow up very slowly Not to say we're immature, but because we have a little more longer time on this earth, we take a lot more of our time to mature fast and to mature at a fast rate. These kids had to sort of start learning and gaining the experience as young as 6 years old. Imagine that. But the movie seems to have a much more light-hearted kiddie feel than for a hard epic movie. That's kind of where it is. It's taken way too lightly. That's where the problem is. And it seems like all the solutions seem to be like, oh well, so quick. I mean, especially when it came to, like, you know, when they started to, like, disguising their warship into a whale boat. It's like, did they build that in like 10 minutes? I hardly think so. Everything seems to look like it's all done in a quick solution. Well, it's not that easy. And it doesn't take 10 minutes. It might take 10 months. If even that's possible. It tries to play it big in intelligence, but then as I sit through it, I don't find the necessity in its intentions. Sure, the history and the knowledge is definitely well researched and provocative. I just wish the story was given the same level as its historical accuracy. I mean, for a story to work, it has to go in sync with the historical accuracy. They can do sort of like the 2 months later, 3 months later, and it would be all the more believable. I mean, I know we're not going to sit there for like 10 months and wait for their ship to be built. No, of course not. I mean, the budget is very limited, and the time it is to make a movie is very, very harsh. But they needed some kind of captioning to sort of tell us that the building of the ship took months to build. And not just, you know, a quick fix solution and boom. With its intentions and details given proper treatment, the lightness in its storytelling doesn't get the equal treatment it deserves, which is why this movie can't be quite regarded as a classic. It's interesting, it's provocative, it's very detailed, but it's also not very, very sufficient with its storytelling. The opening scenes are handled quite well. The nice background of the surprise floating around the tranquil seas on a quiet morning. The tranquility of the open seas may look relaxing from an eye's view, even though we know this is a warship and not a luxury cruise line. And these kids and adults on that ship are not on a vacation relaxing. However, the isolation and the insufferable conditions is a sign that nothing is settling about this voyage. And you know what? That's true. When the battle scenes take charge, there's a sign that the ship itself isn't the only thing taking charge, but the crew behind it. When the cannon fires targets them, the men on board prepare for heavy-duty battle, not for the sake of being tough, but mostly for survival, and that they can't turn away at any point. The film itself is not just based on ship battles, but costume drama and what's happening behind the scenes involving the crew, but the interactions based on the friendships between the two most important authority figures on this ship. Led by Captain Jack Aubrey, played by Russell Crowe, we see a dedicated, determined leader destined to take down this rival, more advanced French ship, because the French ship apparently, according to the story, is more advanced, it's bigger, It's got more advanced equipment. It's got more experienced veteran French soldiers out there. And these guys are definitely the underdogs. So, if you're in the mood for a good underdog story, Master and Commander of the Far Side of the World might be something for you. And this is definitely mostly because Jack Aubrey wants to take this ship down for the necessity of his British pride, and the crew's doctor, Stephen Maturin, an intelligent, loyal man of science and a more critical thinker. Whereas Jack Aubrey wants to use his strengths to take him down, to take this French ship down, Maturin wants to use more logic, more science, more strategic ways to bring it down. Because sometimes to take down an enemy doesn't just require strength, it also takes intelligence. So, Jack Aubrey, the determined guy who will use every way possible to bring it down. Maturin wants to be more logical, more scientific, and more strategic. He's also the only one in the crew who can tell off Aubrey when he's wrong. Nobody else could. If not, punishment will be on his hands. And he can be kind of hostile at times. Captain Aubrey's mission is to stop a French ship from entering Asia. The only problem is this rival ship, like I said, is more powerful and advanced than the one he's commanding. The other crew thinks it's best to surrender and just pack up and go back, but being stubborn and headstrong, he won't rest until he fulfills his mission, regardless of putting himself or his crew's life in danger. And yes, not all of them survive. In fact, many of them are killed in the process, and many of them are very, very young. But hey, c'est la guerre. Not everybody survives, and even some very prominent characters in this movie do not survive the ordeal. The Acheron leads the surprise all the way across South America and into Cape Horn. So relying less on quotes and dialogue, even though there is quite a few of it here, Weir's direction truly demonstrates the isolation of being out to sea. Sure, it might be tranquil and serene, but like I said, this is no vacation. This is no time to kick back, relax, and have a few drinks, sitting on your lawn chair in your flip-flops and your Hawaiian shirts. No, there's a war going on. A ship is causing trouble, and it must be stopped. The battle scenes depicted here are violent, but they serve a purpose and aren't just dependent on body counts, gunshots, and bloodshed. We feel the effects of what it's like to be on board a battleship back in the early 19th century. When we see a young boy get his arm amputated, the delivery will sadden and shock you. There is a lot of sad and shocking scenes. That's one in particular. But it will also intrigue you like the way Weir had intended. Peter Weir, that is. We don't get to see the amputation because the camera doesn't focus on it, which is just as well because we could still see the kid's reaction when it's done. And like I said, there are some pretty disturbing scenes, especially, Holland's suicide after he becomes practically demonized because an inferior or a lesser ranked person disrespected him, and instead of just, giving him some form of reprimand or some form of punishment, he just let it go by. Of course, that does not sit well for Captain Jack Aubrey, who then tells him that he's just not capable of being on this ship, and it inevitably leads to his suicide. There are some fun scenes that take place on this ship, like when Dr. Maturin and a few associates explore the Galapagos Islands to explore the wildlife that inhabit the island. And of course, this whole voyage makes them sometimes think maybe there is a way to overcome the Acheron. They decide to rebuild their ship into thinking that it's some kind of a whaling ship to, fool the French ship so that they can have the upper advantage when they actually do embark in battle. And I thought that was clever and resourceful, although, like I said, it was handled way too easy. Okay, life on the ship was not an easy-going ordeal. When it came to the script, Weir, along with co-writer John Cawley, didn't put every thought into the story due to him never reading the Patrick O'Brian series of books. It just seems off-putting that the relationship between Captain Aubrey and Dr. Maturin seemed to shift from the great bond of mutual respect they have for one another to having a different perspective of this mission. It just happens too soon and too frequent, and also not very well timed. It just feels schematic that director Weir saw this as an excuse for them to argue with each other, to have a little conflict. Like all kinds of friendships and brotherhood often depicted in movies, at some point or another, they're going to conflict with each other, which feels like a big fucking cliche. It starts to feel like the Star Trek movies, where opinions clash and a verbal war ensues, and only stops when cooler heads prevail. It feels like a cliche that every movie has to have these kind of conflicts placed into the narrative just so the audience can choose who to root for. Strength versus logic. You decide. That's basically what they're trying to get at. It just seems very off-putting at times. The conflict also starts to lose concentration on the French ship and the deadly battle that comes with it. But other than that, it's a great film, but the script was really needed more ham-fisted, more aggressive in its terms of storytelling, and not try to make everything so saccharine and light. More teeth needs to have kept us intrigued. And that's kind of like where the movie reels off. It's a good movie. It has a lot of interesting details and interesting effects. And it makes you sometimes feel the need to want to look more into the Napoleonic Wars. Even though the novel claims that this was actually more or less based on the War of 1812, and that the French ship was actually originally an American ship. But I guess they felt that it was more necessary to make the movie more closer to the Napoleonic Wars, I guess. Maybe because the Napoleonic Wars were more interesting than the War of 1812. I don't know. At least don't say, I'm not saying that this movie is just trying to play dress up and everybody's all like dressed up in their sea war uniforms and all this 19th century gallop. But I thought, like the performances were really good. Especially, the performances by both Russell Crowe and Paul Bettany. They had some good chemistry, maybe not the greatest, I know that there were once talks that they wanted to make this into like a mini-series based off of the Aubrey Maturin books by Patrick O'Brian. There's still, even to this day, almost 20 years later, there's still talks about the possibility of having a rebooted miniseries, even though I know Russell Crowe and Paul Bettany would not reprise their roles of Captain Jack Aubrey and Dr. Stephen Maturin because, you know, they're kind of a little too old to be playing this kind of roles. So, of course, they would have to be recasted. But, you know, I think this movie I would recommend. But I still think that they could have done a lot more better emphasis and more ham-fisted delivery in its storytelling to really give it that true unsettling feel about this movie and not make it so lighthearted. So when all is said and done, if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would give Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, a 7.5 out of 10. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules. Be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Carrot Writer saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.